So how does revenue protection work? We'll get into the example here. Basically, in the spring, which actually in February, they averaged the futures market price for wheat and barley, canola, peas as well as a revenue product. So in this example, we're going to use wheat, and we're going to use kind of an inflated price just to make this example simple. But let's say that this spring, all during the month of February, they're going to average the September futures price on the Minneapolis Grain Exchange. And when the month of February is over, the average price of spring wheat ended up being $10 a bushel. And so while you're seeding, basically we're thinking that wheat's going to be $10 a bushel come fall. Let's say you have a 28 bushel guarantee on your crop insurance. That'd be a percentage of whatever your yield is. So if you had a 35 bushel yield times 80%, let's say that's 28 bushels. So starting out, we're guaranteed we're not supposed to make any less than $280 an acre on this piece of ground. So going forward, we go harvest this crop now, and we've cut 32 bushels. Normally, if you harvest 32 bushels on the old crop insurance program, you would not have got a payment, right? Because 32 is above the 28 bushel guarantee. But since this is a revenue product, we'll take you through the steps to see how this is going to work if the market drops. So basically, at harvest on your insurance now, they figure another price, and that's called the harvest price. So the price dropped now to $5 a bushel in August on the September futures. So the grain that you cut and put in that bin or delivered to the elevator, in theory, is probably only worth about $5 a bushel at the elevator. So in our example here, once again, we started with a high base price. We cut more than what our bushel guarantee was, but now the price has dropped off to only $5 as far as how your insurance is going to value it. So we'll turn a claim in at this point. You still qualify for a loss because of a revenue drop. And they're going to value your crop, that 32 bushels you cut, at only $5. So as you can see on here, as far as the insurance is concerned, your crop is only valued at $160 an acre. Remember at the beginning, we were guaranteed $280 an acre. So you would still qualify for a loss payment of $120 an acre in this scenario, not because you cut a poor crop. Actually, we were a little bit above what our guarantee was, but because the grain market had dropped. So this is how revenue protection works. If the price goes down, if the price were to go up above that $10 a bushel mark, we would have to cut below our 28 bushel guarantee to get paid, but we would get the higher price. So let's say wheat went to $15 and we only cut a 20 bushel crop. We would have been 8 bushels below our guarantee. But now the crop insurance is going to pay us on $15 per bushel that we're below that guarantee, not the 10, because you didn't have that grain to deliver at that point. You were short the grain, and you missed out on that opportunity to get the higher price. So what would have happened had we selected the cheaper yield protection, which is, like we said, that's an option that we usually don't have people use here. This is the reason why. Basically, you're only going to save maybe $1 or $2 an acre on the premium side if you choose yield protection over revenue protection. But it's only going to pay if you're short the bushels below this 28 bushel guarantee. So in our scenario, again, you were guaranteed 28 bushels. You harvested 32, so we were above our bushel guarantee. And had we selected just the yield protection portion of this insurance, the price still would have decreased to $5 a bushel, so in theory you would have only got $5 marketing direct at the elevator. You would have been paid on the difference between the 28 bushels and the 32, which 32 is above 28, right? So we have no payable loss in this scenario. You have 32 bushels to sell at harvest for $5 a bushel, so you really only realized $160 an acre on your farm at the elevator if you didn't market that grain ahead. So your total revenue is only $160 an acre versus $280 had you taken the revenue product. This basically ended up costing you $120 an acre gross revenue on your farm for saving a couple dollars an acre in premium. This chart is just an example of what actually happened in 2013 with the spring wheat market. So you can see this isn't as dramatic of a swing, but it did taper off quite a bit from when you were seeding the crop until we got to harvest and what you actually could realize for revenue on your farm. So had you been right on the edge of having a loss as far as the bushel guarantee went, this would have kicked you into a revenue payment. Most of the crops are so good around our areas this year that wasn't a factor anyways, but there was potential for that. So here's some misconceptions about how the revenue protection works. First off, the harvest price of my grain is based off of what I sell my grain for. That, just like we said, is not the case, right? It's only based off a futures market. So this can work both ways. Let's say you had 12 protein wheat. In our example on the previous slides here, that $5 wheat might only be worth $3 at the elevator. The insurance doesn't care what you sell your grain for. They're just gonna use that $5 mark for your payment. Same thing, you could have marketed that grain ahead back when wheat was $10 and actually realized $10 a bushel at the elevator when you sold it and still qualified for a loss on the insurance side as well. So it can work in your favor, especially from a marketing standpoint. But it also sometimes won't really reflect what you're getting at the elevator. So it's not truly guaranteeing you $280 an acre. It's guaranteeing you that when they use their formulas, the futures where it began at and where it ended at is going to be guaranteeing you $280 an acre. So futures market based, which is pretty close to reality for you probably, but not based off of your actual sales. Then the other thing, protein's considered when adjusting for quality. This is not the case on spring wheat or winter wheat. So that's one of the quality factors that they don't use. Well, one thing they do use on spring wheat now is falling numbers. And so if you have issues with falling numbers on spring wheat, we can get some adjustments for that at least, which is good. And then of course, test weight and mold, damaged kernels, that kind of thing we can use to get you deeper into a claim, but protein is not one of those factors. We always put this chart up as part of this presentation just to kind of give you guys perspective on where we're still at in the grain market. This is the national average of all the wheat prices, 98 through 2009. You can see from 98 all the way up to about 2005, we were below $4 a bushel. And then we had some pretty good run up, obviously. Some of this started to happen as the market was crashing. Now, of course, if we would have kept going out under here, we would have been well above this $4 range as well. But in perspective, we're still sitting pretty good from a dollar per bushel standpoint, although I know our input costs are a lot higher on the backside of this too. So for barley for 2014, first off, we're going to go through how they figure your base price on the feed barley or the non-malt side of the insurance here. So your base price is based off of 91% of the September corn futures. That number might change to 89% next year. I don't believe it's a set percentage. They actually adjust that from year to year. So, but this year we're 91% of the September corn futures. The reason for that is that feed barley and corn track each other relatively closely because they're both feed based products for livestock feed. So that puts your base price at only $4.03 a bushel this year versus what was like $5.24 a bushel last year for barley for 2014, just because corn had dropped so much. The one option that people usually look at doing on barley is the malt barley endorsement, which is available whether you choose yield protection or revenue protection. Like I said, most of you would end up doing yield protection, revenue protection on this insurance, but you can do it with either option. It only pays when the quality of your barley is below the following specifications. So if your contract says 80 plump on it to make malt and you end up at 78 and they reject the barley, in order to get paid on the crop insurance side of things, we have to be below 75. So it's important to understand there are some scenarios where there could be kind of a gray area in here where you might get your barley rejected because it doesn't meet contract specs, but it doesn't fall low enough on our scale to get paid on the insurance. So there's the first thing to understand about the malt endorsement. And same thing with protein. A lot of the contracts might say 13 protein. You have to be above 13.5 on the crop insurance to get paid. And then, of course, test weights, thins, sprout, all those factors are taken into account, which is probably the more likely scenario would be a fair amount of sprout, especially in a rain situation. And that you could qualify for easily. So the first thing is, how do I qualify for this option B or the additional malt coverage on the crop insurance? So to qualify, first off, sometime in the last 3 crop years in which you grew barley, excluding the most recent crop year, you had to have not only contracted barley, but delivered 75% or more of your contracted bushels in that year. So we need proof for in the form of settlement sheets for, just as an example, we couldn't use 2013 for this 2014 crop year, but we could use 2012, 2010, or 2011, or even farther back. If the last time you grew malt barley was back in 2000, we could use that. It just has to be one of the last 3 years you grew malt barley. You'd have to pick one of those years, preferably the one that you had the most contracted bushels that would satisfy this, and prove to us that you had contracts that year and that you delivered on 75% or more of your contracts. So how many bushels can you insure in this current crop year? We can insure up to 200% of the contracted bushels that you had in the year we used to qualify. So we'll go through a scenario here, but let's say in 2011 you had 100,000 bushels contracted. You delivered 90,000 bushels on the contract that year as malt. So you're at 90% of what the contract was for that year. So that's above the 75%. So you would have qualified. Now going forward in this current crop year, we can insure up to 200% of the 100,000 bushels we had contracted for our qualifying year. So if we had the 100,000 bushels in 2011 that was contracted that we satisfied the requirements on, going forward, we could use up to 200,000 bushels of contract in this current crop year to add on top of your insurance. So, like I said, you must have a malt contract for the current crop year to qualify. And then the most we can insure above that feed-based price, or that 403 a bushel for this year, is an additional $2 a bushel above that base price. So you could go up to 603 a bushel on the crop insurance side of things for additional coverage for the malt. What are the advantages of the malt endorsement? Obviously, this year, especially with the feed price being so low, is to increase the total coverage of barley you have seeded. Your coverage that's added on the malt side is the difference between the contract price and the 403 base price, up to $2 a bushel. That difference is what will be paid if your barley does not make malt and you have to sell it as feed, as long as the feed price you sell it for is less than the base price. So we'll get into an example here, but basically if all your barley gets rejected but then the feed market runs way up, so you're selling all your feed barley for $6 a bushel, let's say next fall, even though it's rejected for malt, you would actually end up getting the difference between the $6 you sold the feed for and the initial 403 base price taken off of your malt guarantee. So it's important to understand that if not only will this possibly not pay because of some quality issues on your barley, but if you end up selling the feed for more than what the base price is and you have a fair number of bushels of barley, there's a good chance that's going to put a pretty good dent in your payment on this program. Like I said, the base price was set at 403 a bushel in this example. Your average contract price was $6, so your malt coverage then would be based off of $6 a bushel malt contract price minus the 403 a bushel feed price. So we would have an additional $1.97 a bushel guarantee on the malt side of your insurance here. What's the next step? You basically have to prove that you grew barley under contract in one of the last 3 years, excluding the most recent crop year, which we already went through here. And so this screen will probably explain it in more clarity, but basically by March 15th, by the end of by this deadline, we have to prove you delivered 75% or more of your contracts in one of the last 3 years you grew malt barley. So that's what you would have to do right now, or for the March 15th deadline anyways. And then going forward now, in this crop year, we can now insure 2 times what you had contracted in the year we used to qualify. So it may be that maybe you had 100,000 bushels in the qualifying year, and this year you only have 50,000 bushels in contracts. That's all we can use for your insurance would be what you currently have contracted. This 2 times number, that just tells us what the max that we could possibly do in this coming crop year would be. So next, you bring us your contracts for the 2014 crop year, or if you're watching this in later years, basically, you would bring us your contracts for the current crop year, I guess, by acreage reporting to qualify for coverage for this year. If there's a claim, you'll have to deliver all your barley before it's settled, because remember, like we said, first off, they have to prove you didn't sell it for malt, even if it was rejected by your current malt contract place, and also that you didn't sell that barley for more than what the base price is on the feed side of the insurance. And if there's a claim, you'll be paid the difference between your malt guarantee and the bushels that actually made malt. So I should have put one more spot into this slide, but basically, let's say you have 100,000 bushels of contracts that we're able to insure on your crop insurance, and 50,000 bushels actually makes malt or is sold for malt. The rest of it you had to sell for feed below what the base price or at the base price. So your guarantee would be based off of your 100,000 bushel contract times the level you pick on your crop insurance. So you'd have a 70,000 bushel guarantee for your malt side of your insurance, and this is over the whole farm. It's like one big unit. If you only sold 50,000 bushels actually for malt in the end, you would end up getting a 20,000 bushel malt barley claim times that difference from the contract price to the base price. So it's basically paying you if we have a big wreck and you aren't able to deliver on those contracts and you have to take a cheaper price for most of your barley. So the premium for option B, it's kind of an expensive insurance. The risk is relatively high for them too, of course, though, because there's multiple ways they'll have to pay you, right? So you have to pay an extra 40% above what the feed barley premium would be for the comparable liability that's there. So in other words, if we're adding another 50% of coverage to your insurance using the malt barley option, you're going to pay 50% of what your optional unit premium would be on the quote sheets that we send you times 1.4. So you're paying 40% more than you would for comparable coverage on the feed side. And we added malt lines to your quote sheets. If you guys are looking at this presentation as one of our customers, there will be highlighted lines on those quote sheets, and that'll show you what it would cost to do the malt barley option roughly for you. So the disadvantage of the malt endorsement, obviously, this is what we always want people to understand going into this. There's obviously scenarios where this could pay really well. So I never want to discourage anyone from doing it. I just want them to understand the downsides or what could happen in a claim as well. So if you sell barley that goes for feed for more than the base price, it's subtracted from your malt loss payment. It used to be that as long as the barley was rejected, they didn't care what you sold the feed barley for. It just was the fact that it was settled as feed. Now we have to sell all of our barley and then show them the settlement sheet showing them that we didn't get a big premium for it as kind of a middle between malt and feed type price. So that's where that came in. And then payment on the malt coverage will not be made until all barley is delivered. Most of you guys know that grow barley consistently, that sometimes that can stretch way out into the spring, and so it can take a long time to settle these claims as well. Peas are something that are just getting rolling here kind of in Tooele and Glacier County. We're really expanding acres, so it's important for people to understand how these programs work. You can insure peas by type, and different levels can be selected for each type. So you have lentils, smooth green and yellow peas, Austrian winter peas, and forage peas grown for seed. And I forgot to add into this slide, but chickpeas now are also insurable in pretty much all of our counties. I just estimated these base prices as this presentation is being done before the price is settled out, but lentils have a base price of 19 cents a pound. The smooth green and yellows, like I talked about at the beginning of this presentation, actually ended up being 16 cents a pound for this year, which is like $9.50 a bushel. So that's a positive. If you're tracking the yellow market, you'd see that yellow peas are only worth probably $5.50 a bushel, and the greens are probably $10 in that range. So if you're growing yellow peas, you get to use this hybrid price between greens and yellows, or $9.50 a bushel for your base price for your peas for this crop year. And then Desi chickpeas, those were just added to a couple of our counties here. Those will be 18 cents a pound, which would end up being somewhere in the ballpark, I think, of probably $11 a bushel. So peas actually added a revenue insurance component to the coverage a couple years ago. So now instead of just having one price and getting paid if you're short just the poundage on the peas, it's going to work just like the wheat and barley, corn, those crops would, where they're going to establish a base price in the spring, which we just went through. And then at harvest time, they're also going to establish a harvest price to determine whether not only maybe did you lose revenue because of being short on yield, you could also get a revenue factor figured in here for the market dropping on peas as well. The base price is set in early March, which it just happened here. Then the harvest prices probably won't be calculated until December, because instead of using a futures market for this, they're actually using local elevator trades kind of averaged throughout the nation to come up with a price for all the field pea products. So instead of having a futures market that averages even before we're harvesting, kind of like we do on wheat and barley, canola, the only way for them to really get a good grip on what happened as far as your sales at the elevator is to call around to all the places and get their settlements. So that's why it's going to take longer to get your harvest price on this crop. There's no enterprise units available yet on peas. Hopefully that comes here in the near future. This is probably the biggest thing to understand, especially as we get into multiple years of doing this, is that there's rotation restrictions on all these pea and lentil products. Basically, this is for disease problems that develop if you seed these more than once every 3 years in the same field. So on field peas, you can't insure any land that was seeded to peas in either of the previous 2 crop years or on which sunflowers were planted in the previous year. So basically, you can't seed field peas in 2014, then seed wheat, and then go back to field peas. There has to be a 2-year break in there. So what a lot of guys are doing for rotation here, especially if they still have fallow in their mix, is they'll do maybe barley, then peas, then wheat, then fallow, and then of course on fallow you would always put the small grain crop probably back in. So it would go back to barley, then peas again. So we would have peas, then wheat, then fallow, and then a small grain crop, and then peas again. The closest you could rotate peas in there would be to do like peas, then barley, and then peas. You couldn't do peas just 1 year out from when they were seeded prior. And on lentils, kind of the same thing. You can't insure any land in which lentils were planted in the previous 2 crop years or any broadleaf crop in the previous year. So obviously any broadleaf crop could entail all kinds of things. Peas would be one thing, but alfalfa, canola, you could go through a whole list of things that would fall into that category. So basically, unless you have a grass crop before the lentils, you can't seed them and have them insured. What affects my premium? This is something that most people don't understand as to why, when you look at our quote sheets, some of your units might have astronomically higher premiums than the rest of your farm. Part of it is if you had multiple bad years, let's say you'd seeded a lot of recrop just in one spot during the drought years and you kind of quit, so your yield's never been built back up. That would be one way that your premium would increase. A big gap between your rate yield and your approved yields, that's how that happens. It's the bad years that are plugged in there. And then high risk land. So our county is broke out into map areas in Toole County. So if you're in area 1, that's kind of the poorest rated farm ground in the county. If you're in area 5, that would be the best. And of course it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way up through. And depending on where your land lays, that determines what kind of starting yield you would receive. If you have land that falls into this AAA or high risk area, you might pay twice the premium and have literally a fifth of the guarantee that area 5 would be. So it's really good to understand. If you have a lot of high risk land, you could actually split that out on your policy and just insure it as a cat. That would eliminate some of your big premium problems there. So here's one example as to what affects your premium like we talked about. This is what's called a unit, which you guys are familiar with units, or a database on your crop insurance. So if you look here, this crop plan is barley. It's kind of good to understand this, even not from a premium standpoint, but just as to what we're looking at here. So you can look at each one of these. You'll get sheets every fall that shows you all of your history on your farm. This shows this is barley. It's malting type spring barley, where it says M spring. This is unit 207, and the practice is CC, which is recrop. So if we look on this line, it shows you this unit pertains to sections 1 and 12, 37 north, 4 west. And then here's all our years of history that we actually grew recrop barley in this unit. So as you look on here, you can see in 2007, we had a 19 bushel average. The county average for this area is a 38. So the lowest in any given crop year that their yield can go is 60%. So 60% of 38 would be 23 bushels. So in other words, instead of using this 19 to figure what they're going to use for your guarantee in the crop insurance, they're going to plug a 23 in there, if that makes sense. So even if we had a 0, they would plug a 23 into your history to figure your approved yield, which is over here. So we had a couple years here anyways. You can see where there's asterisks by these, where they plugged in yields for us. 2 23s to replace the 2 19s for the 2 relatively bad years. So that created a spread between our rate yield and our approved yield. And when that happens, that actually will increase your premium a little bit on that unit because they were plugging yields in there for you. What affects the premium on this unit? This is an example of that high risk or AAA land. Once again, you look at the top, you can see this is wheat, spring type, CC, and then the map area, though, that's the big thing on this, is in AAA. So this is high risk land. We've had some poor yields in here, and so that created a issue where we actually floored this unit. So over all of your history, if we were to total that up, our yield can never get below 80% of this county average for what they use for your guarantee. So what happens at that point is they floor your unit, is what it's called. So if you look where it says yield floor, this one says 8 in it. If there's a number in this yield floor portion of this unit, that means that they floored it. And then if they floor a unit plus it's high risk land, it's very possible you could be paying $30 an acre for a $60 an acre guarantee on this one unit. So that would be a good place to avoid ever doing recrop wheat again, just because your premium is going to be astronomical really for what the guarantee is there. So enterprise versus optional units. Enterprise units give the producer a significant discount for combining all of his optional units together into one big pot. This works really good if you have just a couple sections of land that are kind of one unit, or maybe they are even in one unit anyways. As long as we have 20 more acres and 2 or more sections, we get to qualify for this big discount. Basically, you have to have a farm-wide loss by crop before any payment will be awarded. So most of you guys are familiar with optional units on the crop insurance side, and that's the thing that we've always encouraged people to do because it'll pay you basically by section on your farm. So if you had one section or one unit get hailed out, the crop insurance would kick in, and that would award you a payment because that chunk of your farm had been wiped out. If you have enterprise units, you're going to get a huge discount on the premium side, but it's going to be a possibility that you could get several sections wiped out by hail, let's say, and not get a payment because the rest of the farm did so well. You still keep your optional units production separate at harvest so that we have the opportunity to switch back and forth from year to year if we want. If you don't keep those units separate at harvest time, then we end up with no option other than just to keep it an enterprise because we have no way to prove that you kept the optional units separate. And this can result into up to an 80% reduction in premium if over 800 acres of total crop. So the more acres you seed into these enterprise units, the bigger the discount. It's a good option if you have a lot of low yields and high premium. How do I qualify for enterprise units? This is the most important thing to understand, is that you have to have 20 or more acres in 2 or more different sections. So you can't seed 10 acres in one section and 600 in the other and get this discount. There has to be 20 or more acres in those 2 sections. So you could have 20 and 600, you couldn't have 10 and 600. If you don't satisfy these requirements, you'll end up going back to the optional unit premium, and so your premium is going to be at least double what you were banking on in this scenario. Are your fields in close proximity to each other and have similar APHs? This is another thing that would help eliminate some of the risk from switching to optional to enterprise. And the more acres you seed of the crop, the bigger the discount. So if you put all your units of one crop / type together, you may end up getting half the farm wiped out by hail and still not get a loss payment. That's the first big risk of enterprise units. Obviously, what would mitigate a lot of that risk would be to use hail insurance to supplement this, right? So if you have a good crop and you have a fair number of acres in enterprise units, you're going to end up having to probably spend as much in hail insurance as what you saved on the crop insurance side. As long as you do that, that takes care of a lot of the risk. So instead of $100 in hail, you might have to buy $200 per acre if it's a good year. If it's not a good year, you probably won't buy the hail at all, and you'll have saved on the federal crop side. So here's an example of what well-grouped units would be. You can see here we have all our units kind of in one area. So let's say they're all within a couple miles of each other. If a hailstorm comes through, it wipes out a good chunk of these units. It's probably going to affect them all. Same thing with the drought would probably affect this area all at once. So if you keep all this crop just in one spot for these enterprise units, at least whatever happens to that area is probably more closely reflected on your crop insurance. Here's what happens, obviously, if these units are spread way out. So some of you guys might have land that's 30 miles apart. It's possible that we have all three of these thrown together in an enterprise unit if you select that option. If a hailstorm comes through and wipes out the middle of your farm, the other two units might still have exceptional crops on them, and there'd be enough bushels between all of these that you wouldn't get a payment. So here's an example of how enterprise versus optional units would pay. So in this example, we have 3 units set up on the screen. As you can see, we have a 30 bushel guarantee on 300 acres on the top one, so a 9,000 bushel guarantee. We cut 6,000 bushels, so we had a 3,000 bushel loss payment with optional units. The next one had a 25 bushel guarantee on 200 acres, so 5,000 bushels. We cut 7,000 here, and so we didn't get a loss payment with the optional units. Same thing on the last one. We had a 4,200 bushel guarantee on unit 3. We cut 5,000 bushels, so we didn't get a loss payment on optional units on there as well. If we have enterprise units, it's going to take all 3 of these units and throw them together into one big pot for the guarantee first. So in this scenario, we had an 18,200 bushel guarantee. We cut 6,000 plus 7,000 plus 5,000 bushels. So like we said, we're rolling all these together into one. So we had 18,000 bushels that we harvested total of wheat, let's say, in the farm. So you end up with a 200 bushel loss with enterprise units, where had we kept this in optional, you would have got a 3,000 bushel loss because of the fact that it reflected what happened to unit 1 completely and didn't add it into the pot. So as you can see, this can make a pretty substantial difference in your loss payment. What would have helped in this scenario, if this was hail especially, is a decent level of hail insurance on the enterprise unit side, because that would have made up for the difference on what we lost in the crop insurance, right? So as you can see on this slide, that just shows you the premium advantage for going one way versus the other. You can see at like 75% level here, we would have paid $15 in optional units and only $571 in enterprise. So we're talking huge difference, a third of the premium in this scenario basically for going enterprise. The important part to remember, like we said, is that you're probably going to have to put that savings into hail insurance if you have a good crop, if you want to go this direction. A level advantage on enterprise units, obviously, like we said, if we go back to this previous slide, it would allow you to buy way farther up in levels. And so that advantage would be that if you get droughted out, your whole farm is going to have a higher guarantee, right? So if you look at this scenario, if we were to be in optional units down here at 65%, it would cost us $9 an acre. We can go all the way up to 80% on enterprise units and still be at $9 an acre. So on a drought scenario where you're short bushels over the whole farm, enterprise units at a higher level, that would be a better payment scenario. Most other things though, whether it's disease, winter kill, insect problems, the optional units would be a better situation. So if, like we said, if you're in a drought scenario, you could buy up to levels which should actually have a much higher loss payment than lower levels in optional units. So on to replant payments, this especially pertains to winter wheat, where we have a lot of patchy situations some years when part of the fields will winter kill out. Your multi-peril insurance will pay you to reseed fields or spots with poor emergence. You must have an adjuster look at these spots before reseeding, and they must be over 10 acres or 10% of the unit. The 10% part only applies if you have a little unit. So let's say you have a 40-acre unit and 5 acres of the unit actually dies out in the winter, so we want to go reseed that and qualify for the payment. Obviously, you'd have to be over 10% of the 40 acres, which should be 4 acres, right? So on those smaller units, you just have to be over 10% of what your total acres in the unit is to qualify for this. These payments are stacked above your guarantee. This is a real quick example. If you're guaranteed $100 an acre on your crop insurance, and then you get a $30 an acre replant payment, that doesn't take away from the $100 an acre you could receive at harvest, or if that unit got hailed out. It actually would stack on top, and it's paid per acre. So the whole unit doesn't have to fall into this scenario. If you had 40 acres out of a 400-acre unit that just did not emerge and you wanted to reseed it, they would pay you the, let's say, $30 an acre on the 40 acres. And it's paid to the landlord per share as well. So that's where one place where we have a problem. So that oftentimes you guys are the only ones that incur the costs on this, but when they pay the loss out, they're going to split it out per the share on the crop insurance. It used to be that we could have the landlord just sign off on the payment. Now they actually physically will issue the payment to the landlord, and if you want to get that part back, you're going to have to go to the landlord and work out a deal with them to cut you a check back on this stuff. The next thing we'll review is production reporting. This is obviously a really important part as far as if you get audited, we want to be accurate on this. So all your production reports should be reported by November 14th. If you end up hauling all your barley over the winter after you've reported this production to us, on the spring crops, we actually have till April 29th to make adjustments for this current crop year on that. So if you end up being off on your bushels, you want to get it down to more of an exact. As we get into the spring, when you finish hauling your grain, please let us know and we can make adjustments from what you reported in the fall on the barley. We just prefer to get this all done on the same date, which would be, I think you guys would agree too, would be simpler for you as it's closer to harvest. So for practical purposes, whether it's winter wheat or barley or canola, we'd like to have it all done by November 14th. There's a tolerance of plus or minus 5% if you're audited before they start making adjustments. So on a 10,000 bushel bin, we can be off 500 bushels before they're going to start to make adjustments in the audit process. And you need to for sure keep the 3 most recent years of hard copy records. Biggest thing on hard copy records would be your truckload records. Those are technically considered soft records, I guess, but those are the things that we have the hardest time coming up with on these reviews, are the truckload records. So please make sure you keep those in a safe place. Going forward, we're developing a system to keep this in our file here for you, which you'll see in the next couple slides. And try and keep recrop and summer fallow separated for each unit as applicable. Record keeping requirements, the most important part of this, even if you have a yield monitor or you're marking your bins or whatever, it's still extremely important to keep truckload records at harvest, because that's really the easiest, most verifiable way to verify your records if we have an audit going forward. And the hard copy records, settlement sheets, fed production records, etc., must be kept for 3 years as well. Obviously, the settlement sheets aren't as critical because usually we can go get those back from the elevators. But if you sell to a private party, like a Hutterite colony or a neighbor or something, make sure you keep those records for each crop year, somewhere that are easily accessible. Most important, though, no matter what other kind of unit structure records you're keeping at harvest, it's important to keep these truckload records as a way to verify your unit splits. So, truckload records from the field must contain the following: the size of the truck or trailer that you're using to haul to the bins or to the elevator out of the field, the number of loads and partial loads from each unit, preferably by practice or type. If it's all blocked together, if you're blocking strips, at least give us an estimate of what it ran on the summer fallow versus the recrop. Date the load was hauled to the bin, and what bin it went into, I should have put on there, and then the unit number or legal description. So other key points on this: bin markings are still a good way to keep a backup of your truckload records. A loss on any crop over $100,000 in any county automatically results in a 3-year APH review. I should have changed that slide out. It's actually $200,000 now, so that, as we reviewed previously in this, that number went up, which is a positive. Make sure you keep 3 years of hard copy yield records, like we said, truckload records, settlement sheets, etc. This is how we like to have you do truckload records going forward. After we report your acres here at our agency, we'll actually generate a map, a book of maps. So it'll have all your fields colored by the crop type. On this map, it doesn't show, but over here we'll have the unit number and the section, your approved yield, and then a place to fill out your production at the bottom. And we'd like you to write on the field itself that you're harvesting at the time, the date that you're harvesting it, the bin that it's going into, and then make the truckload marks down below this line. So as you can see, this is one of our truckload records. We should probably have this even cleaner than what it looks here, but for example purposes, you can see the direction we're going in here. So up here we have the trucks that we were using. So when the Ferris custom harvesters were harvesting these fields for us, they were 850 bushel barley loads. On the SWIM, there are 1,100 bushel barley loads. So as we go down through here, where this says Roger, that's the SWIM loads that we were doing. So Roger harvested 450 bushels in the bottom for us on 8/12, and it went into bin number 7. Up here, as we had the custom cutters going on 8/5, all of this was going into bin 2, and there was 1, 2, 3, 4 loads at 850 bushels plus a 400 bushel load that went into that bin. And so the good thing about this is at the end of the year, you can bring those maps back to our office. We can actually use this as your production report if you wanted. You can sign the back page of this, and then we'll scan it, put it into your file, and if you ever get reviewed, we'll actually have this in our records at the office for use. So that would be another service we could provide to you. On the map-based acreage reporting, we've shifted now from you guys just turning in a spreadsheet with how many acres you have seeded in each section or unit to actually getting us the maps from the FSA before you take them in. We'll plug them in a computer and kick out a map-based report for your acreage report. There's multiple advantages to this. Obviously, having a visual of the actual fields colored with the correct crop is way easier to check than a report with a bunch of lines on it. So, how we would like to have you do this, fill out your maps for the FSA as soon as you finish seeding. Bring in your maps for us to copy before you go to the FSA. So as soon as you guys finish seeding, for our purposes and for the FSAs, the sooner you can get this done, the more accurate it's going to be, and the sooner we can get our information back to you. Bring in your maps to us after you fill them out before you take them into the FSA for them to input. We'll input your acres just as the FSA does and print out a report for you to review and sign off on. So this process pretty much mirrors kind of what the FSA is doing, as you can see. You bring us in your maps, we actually plug them into the computer and kick out a report. Just like their 578, we're going to kick out your schedule of insurance for you to sign to verify that it's correct on the crop insurance side. This is an example of what the cover page of your schedule will look like after we kick it out. So each one of these are different colors, represent different crops. If you were to flip into the inside of this map book, you would actually see what these colors mean. But orange is wheat anyways, blue is peas, and then green would be barley in this scenario, I believe. So you can take a quick visual of your farm over the whole area, make sure that everything looks correct, at least as far as what's seeded in each field. That'd be the first double check. And then as you flip back through the book, you'll see it'll be drilled down to each section or unit that you can visually verify the shares on. We always cover this part, what my crop insurance doesn't cover. Land that hasn't been planted or harvested within the last 3 years, excluding CRP. That's a big one. If you let some ground just sit idle, if it's in dry land hay, maybe you just had it come out of CRP and it was a little piece and you never touched it for over 2 years since it came out. That's not insurable unless we do a written agreement. So make sure you talk to us about anything you're going to do for the current crop year before this deadline. Chemical damage is a big one. You can't go spray your crop with Roundup, obviously, and get paid on the crop insurance side. And then fire not caused by natural causes. This is probably the biggest issue that we have come up, is that this is a man-caused fire. So if you're out in your pickup driving through the field and it starts a fire and burns the whole block up, if your combine starts a fire out in the field and it burns a whole unit or enough of your unit up that it puts it into a loss, your crop insurance does not pay on man-caused fires. So that would be without hail insurance or without a fire policy on the backside of this, you would basically receive zero loss payment and have lost a whole unit of crop at least on that scenario. So first off, make sure your custom cutters carry good liability insurance, because not only could this be an issue on your farm, if it burns over into the neighbors, you would be liable for that as well if they don't have good liability insurance. And also, make sure you either add private hail or at least a field fire policy on top of your federal crop insurance before you start harvesting, or you will not receive a payment from a combine caused fire. One other important thing to note is that state hail insurance is a hail-only policy, so if you take out state hail, you don't get any fire coverage with that as well. So like on our insurance, if you take $100 worth of private hail insurance out, that also is $100 worth of fire insurance that you would get at harvest time. State hail is hail only. And then any acreage in which good farming practices aren't used, that they're going to become stickier on in the future, it sounds like. But if you're really not attempting to do a good job of farming to maintain at least a reasonably average yield, and maybe not fertilizing period when all your neighbors do, not spraying, that sort of thing, then they will have the ability to deny you a loss on that. More government regulations. Neither the insurance agency or the provider can forgive interest charges on a late payment. So this is a big one. If you don't pay your premium on time and then some interest tax on, and then you take that old bill and pay your premium off of that without the interest on it, and then they'll send you another bill if it's not too late when you paid that. If you receive another bill then with like $20 worth of what basically was interest on it, and you don't pay that by the termination date, you will be disqualified for crop insurance for the coming crop year, and we cannot forgive it. It could even be $1.50 worth of interest in this scenario, and we could not forgive it on our end because of some discounting issues. So no matter what, if you get late on your premium payment, make sure you call our office and talk to us about the balance that you owe. It would even be good to come in and we'll mail that off for you, certified mail, to make sure that gets to the crop insurance place in time. Losses must be reported within 72 hours of discovering a loss. You have 15 days after the end of the insurance period to file a claim, which for wheat and barley is October 31st, or when you harvest the unit. So this is the most important thing to understand on this, is that if you finish harvesting a unit on August 31st, and then you wait all the way to the end of harvest, let's say harvest stretches out until the middle of September to turn the loss in, technically they could deny your claim on that first unit that you harvested because we're 15 days past the time you harvested it, or the insurance ended on that unit when harvest was complete on it. So if you get to the beginning of harvest and think there's even a chance of having a claim, it's always better to turn it in and sign off on it later. It's just one piece of paper if you don't want to go through the loss process. So moral of the story, once you even begin to estimate that you might have a loss, please turn it in and we can always sign off on it later. Agents can no longer be involved in the adjustment process. That changed probably at least 5 years ago. So we cannot be in the same room with you and the adjuster when working on your federal crop claim. That's a major violation of the government's portion of the federal crop policy. So what do you need approval to do? Obviously destroying a crop that's not harvested. Before you do that, even if you get something that's completely wiped out by hail, make sure you get an appraisal done on that before haying it or destroying it, so that we can get you a loss payment for one, probably on it, but also if there's still 5 bushels of wheat sitting out there, you just don't want to harvest it, at least we can put that on your crop insurance as a yield and not just get a plugged, possibly zero yield in there. Grazing or haying is another thing. If you want to switch from what you consider to be a grain crop to a haying crop, we need to get an appraisal before you do that. Any failure to get approval on any of these practices will be an assigned yield for that year and no loss payment will be awarded. So make sure you get a hold of the adjuster before doing anything that's out of the ordinary with your crop. It's absolutely critical that every person with a share in your operation is listed on your crop insurance application and that there are no errors in the Social Security or EIN numbers. That's another big one. We want to make sure that everyone that has a share in your operation is listed. If not, that could disqualify you for their share of your loss payment and also possibly disqualify you for disaster payments at the FSA. What crops are insurable through multi-peril insurance? Pasture and rangeland, which is a fall deadline thing, we'll have another presentation on that come this fall. Wheat, barley, oats, canola, peas, lentils, and camelina. Like we said, chickpeas have been added into here as well. And then if some of these crops, even though they're not insurable in our counties, there's other ones. If you're in Hill County, we just covered kind of Tool and Glacier here. You might have safflower or something over there as well. If it's not insurable through us, we can still get it insured. We just have to do that before this March 15th deadline. So if you're going to be doing any crops that aren't by default covered in our county, let us know. We'll send in a written agreement, it's called, and we can get that coverage more than likely added. But we need to do that early, at least a week before this deadline, preferably a month before would be better. So forage seeding. If you guys go seed some hay ground or equip or something, we can actually insure the value or the cost of that seed in a way. And then as we go through the next crop year, come next spring, if you seed it this spring and it hasn't come up by next spring, or if it winter kills next fall, we can get you a payment on that. And all other crops that need to be covered by a NAP through the FSA or through a written agreement with us. What to check on your apps? Are your tax ID and social security numbers correct? That's the biggest thing. Like we said, all the shares in your entities need to be listed on there, and we need to make absolutely for sure that the social security numbers are correct for each one of those individuals. So it's not only listing the names, it's making sure that we have the individual's information correct. That can create some issues as well if we don't have that. So has anything changed with your policy? Basically, the biggest changes that usually happen is maybe someone died, maybe one of your shares had passed away. It maybe is changing from an individual to a trust or an estate because of a death, or maybe incorporated during the year. We need to know those things because we have to match the FSA on all of this stuff. So have you selected the program and level you wish to be in for your crop policy? And are there any other crops you'd like to add that aren't insurable or maybe aren't listed on your application? Well, usually we'll list every crop in the county that you possibly could insure at least a pretty low level, so that if you guys decide after this deadline that you're going to go out and, let's say, seed canola, and you never have before, at least it's listed on there so we have insurance to qualify for FSA linkage. Most of you received in the mail this checklist. Has anything changed in your entity structure? We need to know like we said, if you're adding or removing a share in like your corporation or partnership, if someone died and now it's changing to an estate, if any of your landlords died that you're actually doing the crop insurance for, um, please let us know, not only on your policy, but on all those other entities that you're signing off on as well. Do you understand enterprise versus optional units? We went through that previous slides here, but please let us know if you don't understand that and you want to consider doing it. We really need to explain that to you before you just choose it blindly. So have you decided on a unit structure for each crop? Please just check the box as to whether you'd want OU, which is optional units, or EU for wheat, barley, and canola on your policy. In any counties do you farm, do you have less than 2 years of history for any crop? This isn't only just history, but less than 2 years of experience, I guess it should say. So if you grew canola once back in the 90s, there may not even be history of it in your crop insurance policy, but we need to know that so we can get you a new producer exception, is called, on your crop insurance. So if any of the crops listed over on the right column over here, if any of these crops you have less than 2 years of experience ever growing in the county, and this isn't just your entity, it's you or anyone involved in your entity has less than 2 years of experience with these crops, please check it over here. Obviously, a simple example of this would be dry peas. If you've never ever grown peas, just check that. And canola, if you had 1 year of history and it was back in the 90s, check canola and write 1 year sometime in the 90s, just so we know. Have you picked a level for each crop on your policy? Do you understand how revenue protection works, which we went through in the previous slides as well? If you don't understand that, we'll give you a call and explain it, because that's a pretty important component of your crop insurance to understand. On the back side of this sheet, there's some really important things to review before this deadline as well. So are you going to be doing any new breaking this year? New breaking would be anything that hadn't been farmed before, obviously, which would be like we talked here, native grassland. Hay ground that's been in dryland hay for more than 2 years that you're now breaking out and are going to farm. And then CRP. So if you check CRP, tell us the acres and the year that the CRP contract expired. If we get more than 2 years out from when that CRP contract expired, that's now considered new breaking, so it's not insurable without some additional paperwork here. The number of acres is incredibly important as well too, because if it's over 320, or if it's in a map area, a soil type that we can't do in-house here, we have to send that to the government by this March 15th deadline. So if you don't let us know by March 15th and you have a whole bunch of acres of new breaking over 320, it's just not going to be insurable for this coming crop year, which can lead to all kinds of problems at the FSA and obviously on your insurance end as well. So let us know whatever you're doing that might involve some kind of new breaking, and we'll discuss that with you to make sure before this deadline we have that covered. Will you be growing any crops that aren't insurable through us? You may not know what all's insurable in your county, so if it's something questionable, just check yes here and write it over there. It may not be just these crops. It might be something different, like whatever you guys come up with, basically, that would be a crop that's not, that you know is possibly not insurable on your crop insurance anyways. Please check yes and list it over on the right hand side so we can get that sorted out here as well. That has to be done by this March 15th deadline too. Do you have a malt contract for 2014, and do you wish to insure it? At the very least, if you're just waffling back and forth in this and considering the malt coverage, do the qualifier for this deadline. In other words, prove to us that you grew malt in the past and delivered 75% of your contracts. And then if you don't want to insure it later, we just won't get your contracts at acreage reporting time. You're not committed yet on this, but if you don't do the qualifying part, you don't have the option. So, and have you added any land in your operation this year? If yes, fill in the appropriate information. This could be either lease ground that you picked up or land that you purchased. We need to know which county it's in, and then the total cropland acres. If it's, we can go up to 640 cropland acres, and you still would just get the simple average of all your other yields on your farm. In other words, we could use kind of your other yield history to give you a guarantee on your new crop ground. If we get over 640 acres, then we have to send some information into the government to have them determine what yield we can give you. And if you're over 2,000 acres, your only option is to use the county average for that year. This is total cropland, not total acres you're going to seed. So please let us know the total cropland that you picked up. Here's your application you probably received from us in the mail. As you can see, here's the crops that you had last year and what levels that you were insured in. Up here is the main producer on your farm and your tax ID number for that entity. This might be a corporation instead of an individual, and this would be the last four of the EIN number instead of the social security number. In this scenario, this is Wendy's stuff, so Wendy's the lead on this on the farm. I'm her spouse, and so underneath the spouse here, we would have my tax ID number, the last four listed on here. And then all of the SBIs, if this was a corporation, should be listed down in this spot, which there's nothing here because we're not incorporated for the farm portion of this. But as you can see, everybody under your corporation should be listed then down on that line. The next page has some questions which you should go through and read and answer. Basically, if you're indebted to the federal government, especially on the crop insurance side, you don't qualify for insurance then if you got past the termination date. If you've been convicted of planting, growing, or harvesting any controlled substance, so if you got caught growing marijuana in your basement and it was a felony conviction, you would not qualify for crop insurance then for 5 years. And just go through these, make sure that you don't fall into any of these categories, which you shouldn't. One of them would be, do you have any like insurance on the above crops? That means, do you have another federal crop policy for the same land somewhere for these crops? You can't double insure anything, so that would be what that question pertains to. I'm going to skip the county rate sheet because we are going to individual farm quoting for most of you guys. So this next page shows your full farm quote. Just a real quick explanation as to how these full farm quote sheets work. Here's all of your units listed over here. So this is unit 301 barley in this example. These are in enterprise units, which is what EU means on this quote sheet. So most of you guys we sent an optional and an enterprise unit quote sheet to. If it says EU on your sheet, that means that's the enterprise unit sheet. If it said OU, that'd be optional units over here. We quoted all of these, whether they're shared or not, at 100% so that you could compare unit to unit what your premium would be on a 100% basis. In this land, in our scenario, we actually have a 70% share here. So in the end, we're only going to pay 70% of this premium and get 70% of the coverage on this shared unit. But just so you guys understand how we did that, all this is quoted on a 100% basis. Then over here's your premium at these different levels. So for this piece of ground, we have a 28 bushel average on recrop barley. If we choose the 70% level, we can come across here in enterprise units and see that would cost us $3 an acre, and the coverage would be $78 an acre, which is based off of that 403 base price. Down here then would be summer fallow barley. You can see you have a 39 bushel average here, so at 70%, we'd be guaranteed $110 an acre then in this scenario. So this lets you just see as you go up levels what your premium is going to be for each unit on your farm. It's also a good way to go through and look at your approved versus rate yields for each unit. Like we talked about, if any of those get spread out, if your rate yield's quite a bit lower than your approved yield, you'll notice this premium is going to be substantially probably higher if it gets too low over here versus the rest of the units on your farm. So if you're going to seed, if you kind of know where you're going to seed each crop, you can go through and kind of write your acres in here, and then this will give you an idea what it's going to cost per acre per unit on your farm. Here's a pea example. You can't do enterprise units on peas, so this is optional units, and you can see how much more expensive that is. It's going to cost you $12 an acre for the 70% level on peas here, and you'd be guaranteed $161. And then anything that's a 2200, so this says 0022, those are highlighted on your guys' sheets, I believe, but those are your malt units. So if you go across there to add the malt coverage to my barley in this example, for my recrop unit would be $4.50 an acre, and it's going to add about $60 an acre worth of coverage if I had enough contracts to satisfy to get all the way up to what my APH is, and if my contract was $2 above the base price is what that quote's for. So this is just zoomed in on here, just showing you the levels, the guarantee, which is your bushel guarantee per acre, and then the coverage and the premium over there next to it. Key crop insurance points: report all your information well before the deadline. That's probably one of the biggest ones for us. Most of our mistakes, probably 90% of them, are the ones that we have somebody come in the day of the deadline with their maps for us to input it in the computer, and we have to plug that in there as quickly as possible, crank that report out, have you look at it and sign off on it. That's always when mistakes happen, is when we wait till the end. So please get your stuff done as soon as you're done seeding. I know the paperwork's not fun to do, but it would help you from an accuracy standpoint, and it really helps us get your stuff done in an accurate manner here as well. Obviously, double check all the paperwork you get from us. Like, we'll send you out that schedule, and usually attached to that we'll write on there, you have this many total acres of recrop and summer fallow wheat, and this many total acres of recrop and summer fallow barley. At the very least, have a good number in your head of what your total acres are of each crop. That would at least let us know that we're not missing a bunch of land. But ideally, go through and check each section or unit on your map and make sure we have the shares right on the fields, and that it doesn't appear that we're missing anything. So talk to your agent before sales closing. This is a really important deadline for making all kinds of changes, whether it's a death or a marriage maybe happened, or maybe you got married and you didn't let us know. We need to get this all set up by this deadline, or we can run into some serious ramifications at the FSA and on your claims process. New breaking we need to know about, added land, and growing crops not insurable in the county. Those are all really important by this deadline. So thanks a lot for taking the time to watch this presentation. I hope you guys got some good out of it. We would love to hear your input on whether this web format or not is going to help you out. But this slide was obviously done for our meeting, but please, instead of don't leave without signing your applications, please get your applications back to us as soon as possible. And give us a call if you have any questions. We appreciate your time, and thanks for watching our presentation.